From not taking enough risks with his directing style to making jokes about homophobia and assault, here's why James Gunn needs to be fired from Hollywood. Hollywood won't be losing out on anything here. At least that's what most people think. A lot of people on the internet have started to open up about how Gunn isn't the god of a director he's made out to be. In fact, he hasn't made a good movie in a while. Sure, Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is getting praise from fans and critics, but you all know where the bar for this franchise is, right? Or are you forgetting how disappointing Guardians 2 was? Longtime fans who absolutely loved the first film were left disheartened after the sequel came out. Even after rewatching and trying to reason with the storyline, it just didn't make sense. Obviously, Guardians 3 was much better than the second one. That doesn't mean it was the best. Marvel fans think that people had really low expectations this time around. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he's a bad director through and through. He's good, but just as good as any other Marvel director out there. Let's face the facts here. Firstly, his portfolio isn't diverse at all. Can you name any of his movies that aren't superhero themed? That's because James has only directed 2 non-superhero movies, Super and Slither. And I bet you haven't heard of either. Super is a superhero film, just not in the conventional sense. Compare this portfolio with those of people like Christopher Nolan, who've also worked in the same genre, and you'll know what I mean. Gunn has found a style he's comfortable with and stuck to it, but that's never a sign of good creative leadership. Is Hollywood a place for someone who doesn't take risks? Even within his superhero films, Gunn usually recycles the same jokes, tropes, and techniques. At this point, can you even blame him? He's been a Marvel director for so long that it's the only thing he can do right now. If there's one thing Marvel is criticized for these days, it's the childish takes and jokes that every film is overloaded with. Sometimes the movies are trying way too hard to appear cool or stay relevant, and that just kills the whole mood. For Gunn, he assumes that Marvel's main audience is just teenagers, which, as we all know, is far from the truth. But James's writing reflects that more than it should. His humor is too immature sometimes, and fans can't help but cringe at many scenes. But it's not just his humor either. Gunn also doesn't experiment with his filming techniques. The only dolly scene from Guardians of the Galaxy is apparently the only thing he can pull off. While everyone seems to be raving about it, let me remind you all that Gunn didn't invent this technique. In fact, you could call it one of the most overused techniques in cinema. If Gunn really wants to use it, he should maybe learn a thing or two from film directors like Spike Lee, who's actually been innovative with the dolly shot, so much so that it's become their style now. What's Gunn's style? Aerial shots of superheroes in space? When you look at his attempts to revamp a dead franchise like the Suicide Squad, you'll notice how painfully dry the movie becomes after a certain point. It settles into a comfortable place, and that's that. Gunn's writing also comes into the fire here, as he tries to rebuild the most psychopathic villains kids will ever see into people who still have hearts. But he does so in a very rushed and messy way, and it makes zero sense. It's boggling how someone like him could land a place at the top of DC. I'm sure most DC fans know how disastrous this arrangement is going to be. Fans knew it would all go downhill when he fired Henry Cavill. Henry Cavill is the most beloved Superman of all time. Gunn may think he has better visions for a younger Superman, but honestly, you can't announce someone's casting and then say he was never included in the first place. It was so disrespectful to both Henry and his fans. Fans have been waiting for Man of Steel 2 for a very long time. Zack Snyder wasn't ever going to create it himself. We've accepted that reality, but we need something, don't we? As I said, Cavill was perfect, and one movie was never going to cut it. By trying to get a new Superman now, Gunn has prepared everyone for disappointment. No one will like the younger lead. He will be compared to Cavill at every step of the way, and his success won't depend on his performance alone. He'd have to prove that his casting was worth Henry being fired for, and that's going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible. Unfortunately for Gunn, Superman might just be the start of his problems. Since the revamping of the DCU seems half-baked as it is, Gunn was big on rebooting the entire DC universe by killing off every remnant of the Snyderverse. But his current slate is pretty confusing, to say the least. Now, Superman is supposed to be the first superhero to be rebooted in the DCU, which makes zero sense since Batman is much older. Would Batman have been underground all this time before Clark Kent's rise to publicity? Is that even possible? Gunn is already messed up with Superman. He really can't touch Batman now, a character that's given DC most of its successful films. That will cause massive destruction. Another issue with Gunn's slate is the introduction of Wildstorm characters, who, in case you don't know, have very diverse stories. Groups like the Authority have always been more proactive and drastic compared to the traditional DCU teams. How will they fit together? All of this makes us question whether Gunn's already outdated style is right for a studio that's hanging by a thread. His Suicide Squad performed poorly at the box office, and if there's anything DC doesn't need, it's more flops. If you look at his portfolio of work, you'd see how James's style is very centered around quirky characters. The Justice League, however, isn't really known for its quirks. We've got Matt Reeves handling noir characters like Batman for now, but imagine what Gunn could do as a creative supervisor. Is his style really fit for someone like Bruce Wayne? I don't think so. But filmmaking aside, Gunn isn't exactly the best person either. You all saw how he disrespected The Rock, right? Was that really necessary? I know that The Rock was playing with fire and poking his nose in places he shouldn't when he tried to have authority over the DCU, but you can't deny that he had been fighting too hard for too long to be embarrassed by Gunn like that. Dwayne Johnson is one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood. Say what you like about his vision, but you all know that he was very passionate about it. And now, poof, he's gone. He was completely erased as if he never even existed. See, many people have picked issues with Gunn's handling of things here, but it hardly comes as a surprise when you're aware of his Twitter controversies. I'm talking about a notorious series of offensive tweets that got him fired from the sets of Guardians 3 back in 2018. Now, when I say offensive, I don't mean disrespecting actors or fans here. I mean joking about sensitive topics like homophobia and assault. You know something's really bad when a studio as big as Disney severs its business relationship with someone over his statements. These tweets that date back to 2008 and 2011 were recently uncovered by angry fans, and they were shocking. Their content is too graphic to state here, but let's just say that joking about violence isn't a big deal for James. In one tweet, he even directs some of his old jokes toward kids, which is horrendous as it is, but in a place like Hollywood, where these issues are actually widespread, that's insensitive and ignoble on a whole other level. That's not where it ends though. Gunn once wrote a blog post that was laden with homophobic and sexist takes, like calling Batgirl a teenage mother in the comics. So, if you ask me, the fans are right to ask how and why this person even deserves a place in Hollywood, let alone at the top of one of the biggest studios? So from joking about things like racism and assault, to not taking enough risks with his directing style, these are the reasons why Gunn needs to be fired from Hollywood.